Hello and welcome to Culture Reset with me, Caroline Kenyon.
And with me, Juliet Kumar.
And in Culture Reset, we like to talk to people about the things that shape and reshape the culture of the workplace.
And that can be through personal experience at the sharp end of organisational success or failures.
Or through their particular knowledge and skills, maybe as a coach or an organisational psychologist. Which brings us to today's guest. And with us in the Culture Reset studio is Andy Whitehead. Hi, Andy.
Hi, really nice to meet you guys.
Hello.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, so I'm Andy Whitehead. I'm a certified business psychologist. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I'm also an executive coach. My job has taken me to lots of different places across the UK, Europe, the Middle East. I've been really fortunate to meet lots of different people, lots of different managers and leaders, teams, organisations. I tend to work with individuals and teams and organisations that are under pressure. What I'm really interested in is behaviour and how particularly leadership behaviour can start to shape the culture in organisations, the well-being of teams, and overall psychological safety and performance. So I do a lot of work around things like mental toughness and mindset, but from a psychological point of view, not from a kind of it's just my opinion. So I always like to work in the science, not in the opinion side of things.
Mm-hmm. So you're interested in how the personality traits, behaviours of leaders can affect or impacts people in organisations and ultimately the organisation's success, I suppose. So what makes a bad boss?
Oh, what makes a bad boss? Well, I think straight off the bat, I think it's important to not think of all bad bosses as malicious. So bad bosses, it's probably more around bad behaviours. So it could be a lack of skills. You quite often get people who are technically very proficient, but people blind. So they might get promoted because they've been successful in a role, but they don't necessarily have the skills to manage and lead, motivate and inspire the employees. What we tend to see with bad bosses is things like low self-awareness. So that can be typical. So they're not reflecting or able to reflect on what am I good at, what am I not so good at, how do I manage and lead my people. You'll also start to see when the pressure's on, they might regress into things like over-control or blame shifting. And these are all, for me, fall into the category of behaviours rather than you're just a bad boss. It's just that the things you're doing are not really very effective. And I think it's also important to think about intent and impact. So most of the time, most people, their intent is positive. So they want to build a culture, they want to improve performance, they want to build teamwork. But because of their behaviours, you end up with a negative impact. So you end up with something that's detrimental, not positive.
And what do you call those people? Those people who act in that very extremely impactful way, has a negative impact, all those traits you've just mentioned about being controlling and shifting blame?
I think that, so you can go down the kind of personality testing route. You can look at people with more dominant styles, more influential styles. So there's various psychometrics. I use something called DISC, so dominance, influence, steadiness, conscientiousness. So instead of labeling the person, I focus more on labeling the behaviours because we're all quite a complex mix of different behaviours. So it's not that we're all exactly the same. So somebody might be a more dominance-oriented type of leader, but they might be very different to another leader who is very dominance-oriented because they have more influence or more steadiness or more conscientiousness. So understanding the complexity of it, I think, is important rather than labelling the person. However, you do come across managers and leaders who maybe their behaviours are much more consistent over time and negatively consistent. So kind of watching out for those patterns is important. We can all have a bad day. We can all make a bad decision. We can all do something and upset somebody. It doesn't make us a really bad person or a really bad boss. But when we start to see patterns, that can lead to something maybe a bit darker.
I know you've used the term corporate psychopath, haven't you? Can you explain what that means?
So corporate psychopath, it's not my term. It was I think coined by Dr. Paul Badiak and the work that he did, building on Robert Herr's psychopathy work. So if we think about psychopathy, and again, I'm trying to avoid labeling an individual as something, but psychopathy is very much a kind of a continuum. So we can all have some psychopathic traits to us, so from very low to very high. Now, research shows that probably 1% of the population might have higher levels of psychopathy. It doesn't mean they're all axe-wielding psychopaths, because psychopathy is actually just one of 3 dark personality traits, and it's called a dark triad of personality. So we have Machiavellianism, we have narcissism, and we have psychopathy. And different people, especially if we think about managers and leaders, can maybe have traits in one or all of those. There is a common thread, which is low empathy across all of them. So when you see poor behavior from a leadership perspective and patterns of it, then we start to think, well, maybe they will fall into one of those 3 kind of traits. So patterns are important, and over time. So from a corporate kind of psychopath point of view, you start to see, so there's an acronym that I use called CLAMPS. So you think of these people clamping onto an organization, and they start to suck out the kind of positivity in terms of the culture. They don't have to be managers, they could just be employees. Charm. So you'll see superficial charm with these people. When you meet them immediately, they could be very positive. They'll win you over very quickly. They'll have low levels of emotion. Of ethics. So low ethics. Don't really care about people. They don't really care. The end justifies the means to a certain extent. So the third element is accountability. So it's avoiding accountability. So anytime something goes wrong, if you try and blame the person, they'll always find somebody else to blame, and they'll do it in a very clever way, which brings us on to the next point, which is manipulation. So they're very good at manipulating people, relationships, information. They'll rewrite history to suit themselves. And then the P is around power, and they have a very kind of grandiose view of themselves, so they feel more powerful than they are, and they will let people know about that. And then the S is very much around a shallow level of emotional intelligence. So we can be very good at picking up when people are being genuine or being disingenuous. And if you think about people that have that kind of cold stare, but they might smile, but not necessarily with the eyes, that doesn't mean they're a psychopath. But that could be a red flag in terms of, especially when you start seeing patterns of things.
I suppose that's one of the issues is finding the data. So when you say patterns, you're looking at repeating behavioural patterns, something that happens again, or it seems to be something that person might do over and over again. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it wouldn't be just a one-off incident. I think you would start to have more people. So multiple people will be telling similar stories about this person, negative stories. Before talking to you guys, I was thinking about a few examples, and obviously I need to be careful to make sure these are anonymous. So from my past, I've thought about people I've worked under, people I've worked with from a kind of management consultancy point of view, a coach, there's a business psychologist. Because I don't go in and try and diagnose people. It's about, well, what are the behaviors that are happening, and what are the shifts that we're looking for in terms of organizational, team, and individually. And there's a few people that kind of come to mind. So there was, if I'm going back quite a number of years, so I was in my kind of engineering days, and I was there was a boss of mine, and he did lots of things. So from a pattern point of view, he would definitely manipulate people, but it was always in private. So he would get you in, and he would try and manipulate you to do something that he wanted. Generally quite a negative thing, and arguably was it certainly not ethical? Whether it was legal or not, maybe it was a grey area. But his disregard for the well-being of other people was quite blatant. So there was one particular person, an older guy, and he'd been off for about 6 months, heart problems. He came back. There were 2 people in the office that did that role, and I knew that the boss wanted to go down to one person. So this guy comes back, and he was away from he'd only been back a week, and he was away from his desk, and the boss came up, started taking photographs of the desk. And next thing is he had the guy in the office, and he used those photographs to say, this is proof that you're not doing what you should be doing, just to put pressure on him. It wasn't like a formal disciplinary, it wasn't anything like that. It was just, I'm going to put pressure on this person who's just come back from having heart problems or a heart attack. And the guy was so upset, and it was quite shocking, and he ended up going off sick again and never returned. And when I think about that person, I think, was he a corporate psychopath? I don't know. But if I think about the pattern of behaviours, he would definitely start to tick a lot of boxes. And for him, I think the end always justified the means.
So how do you become a corporate psychopath? Are you born one, or is it ruthless ambition that accentuates those inner traits?
I think that, so from a psychopathy, a clinical psychopathy or clinical psychopaths, a simple kind of distinction is, you think about psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. So through your kind of experiences, your upbringing, the events that happen through your life, that's something that we would talk about. A sociopath. Psychopathy tends to be probably more around that kind of like how people are wired, so how they are, so maybe more of kind of a physical thing anyway. So probably more that is kind of the way you are. And when we think about who amongst us could be high on the psychopathy scale, it's probably about 1% of the population. If we think about high levels of clinical psychopathy, when we think about the workplace and we think about people who may be high on that kind of psychopathy scale, it's more like 2 or 3 in every 100. So it jumps up. It doesn't mean that they are psychopaths in the Hollywood sense of the word. And there's a bit of a distinction. So if you think about a clinical psychopath, you start thinking about healthcare and criminal settings. These are people that really struggle with society norms and rules. But with the corporate psychopath, it's more about, these are people that find ways to work and bend the rules strategically. So they almost go hidden. So things like that, the superficial charm, they're very good at progressing. So you will see these people doing well at interview, being promoted. Sometimes it's not too late, but the damage has been done. And then as they become more senior, it becomes more extreme.
So you're talking about when you're working with teams or organisations with difficulty that might be brought in, and many of the people that you work with or coaching, you can raise a self-awareness around the impact of their behaviours on other people. How does that differ when you're working with somebody who has got more Machiavellian, what was it you called it, the dark triad?
So it's Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathy. I mean, so if you start to recognise somebody, and I'll give you another example. I think it can be if you start to recognise some of the traits. So okay, and they're not that easy to spot. So immediately somebody might be very charming. That doesn't mean they're a psychopath. That just means they're charming. Unless you then start to see that there's not a lot of substance behind that charm. And then you start to see this kind of manipulation and avoidance of accountability. So there was a particular person that I worked with. I wasn't employed by the company. I was a contractor working for them. So I was looking at building the kind of leadership development program, workshops and coaching, kind of traditional leadership development program. And a couple of things started to stick out at me. The first was in this person's office, they had a desk, which is pretty typical, and there were a few chairs in front of the desk. Those chairs had the bottom 2 inches taken off the bottom of the legs, so that anyone who sat down was significantly lower than the person, And I thought that's a bit odd, slightly worrying, but that's what it is. Then in the workshops, when the director, so the most senior person, attended the workshops, this person was always there. When the director didn't attend a workshop, and occasionally he didn't, this person wasn't there. And not because he was with the director, because he just, I started thinking, well, is this because there's no purpose to him coming to it? Because the director's not there, so he can't show off. Then another thing was the one-to-one coaching. So I set up coaching with different people, but I could never get this person to attend a coaching session until one day he agreed to a coaching. Well, I thought he'd agreed to a coaching session, but he took me out for lunch instead. And then it was just a monologue of his successes and what he was actually fantastic at. And I didn't get a chance to quiz him on anything. And if you start to try and ask about things like, what are your strengths? What are your potential weaknesses? I got some very strange answers to that. And that's another red flag. So somebody that with these kind of psychopathic or dark triad traits is not going to be very good at looking at themselves and reflecting. So if anyone out there is worrying about, well, am I a psychopath? If you're thinking about it and reflecting on it and worrying about it, you're probably not. But I think this guy probably scored quite highly on it.
So you probably can't change them then, can you? If someone's going to be like that, what can you do about it?
I would suspect it's quite difficult to change somebody. I think so if you kind of dip into the clinical psychopath arena and you start thinking about that clinical setting, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, but you talk about treatment for people and to try and change some of the kind of behaviors. From a work point of view, you're not really seeing people that are doing something. It's not violence and criminality. Okay, there might be some fraud because they'll have low kind of aversion to risk, so they'll take chances as well. It is very, very difficult, I think, if not impossible, for some to change some people. And sometimes the best approach is, you have to kind of remove them from the organization. But that brings a whole set of challenges in itself.
Because if they were self-aware, they might agree to have CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy,
so
to help them address the issues.
Absolutely, and whether CBT would help, it's about how you would ever get somebody to do that
if they're not self-aware.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking about this particular guy, and there was no way he didn't recognise anything that he did was wrong. Everything he did was fantastic. I mean, there was plenty of examples that I saw and heard from other people around a success somewhere, and all of a sudden he would take on that success as his own, or where something he was in charge of was failing, he would blatantly blame somebody else, but so blatant. And I would think, how does this person get away with this? Which then makes you start to look at the organisation, and there are some red flags around the organisation.
Do you find that perhaps people like this either move from job to job? Do they, kind of eventually get pushed out the organisation, or are they? Can they be there? Can they settle in for a while they've got control of the organisation?
I think these people can, because of the qualities they have. So the superficial nature of those qualities, they can come across really well at interview. They can be very charming, but they can also, because of the lack of empathy, they can have a big focus on results, and they can talk about, and they'll be, they'll bull up their results and what they've achieved. So they can sound like, this guy would be great, this woman would be fantastic. They'd really push on our performance. So if you're in an organization where results really matter, I don't know, most organizations would say they do, then we might turn a blind eye at some of the negative things because we think we're getting results. And a big red flag from an organizational point of view would be high performance, high employee turnover. So that might be a red flag. It doesn't mean that the organization is full of corporate psychopaths, but it's definitely a red flag in terms of maybe some of the leadership is a bit toxic and short term.
So, yeah, and what does it feel like working for someone like that, and how does that affect the culture of the whole organisation?
It's I would say it's really, really horrible working for somebody. So if I think about the person that was my manager a number of years ago, and how I felt. So I'm there was a particular incident where I was putting myself through an MBA, and I was using my own time, like on a flexi time thing. So I was kind of using my own time. I paid for it myself. The organisation did not owe me anything. When they took me on, I was doing that, and it was agreed. And when I think I'd been there about a year, the guy pulled me into the office and said, "You owe me some holidays." And I was like, what do you mean I owe you some holidays? Well, you've been taking every Thursday afternoon, you've been leaving 3 hours early. I'm like, but that was agreed at my interview. Oh, it's nothing to do with me. So I immediately got up and walked out and went to see the director, which was slightly worrying because the director sat back and said, I said this to him, and he sat back and went, I don't think anything was in writing. And then at that point, I realised there's a problem this is an organizational issue. I wasn't a coach or a business psychologist then. It's now reflecting back that I see that kind of corporate psychopathy, those kind of dark personality traits were at the most senior level. So no wonder people were turning a blind eye to some very negative behavior from one particular manager.
So there was a tolerance at that level for those behaviours.
Yes, and I've seen that repeated in different organisations.
I must say it resonates with me over my long career, so obviously a long time ago.
Absolutely. I think probably we've all had some experience of those kind of behaviours in some shape or form, yeah.
I would think most of us, just in terms of statistics, if 2 or 3 people out of every 100 in the workplace might have higher levels of psychopathy, then you would definitely come across those behaviours and traits.
And I know for myself, working in a creative industry, your creativity is most definitely squashed if you work for someone with those controlling behaviours, looking to apportion blame because you've suddenly become very acutely aware of the risks of suggesting something that might be a bit out there and be jumped on. So yeah, it's definitely not conducive to creativity.
No, and I think if you have somebody with those kind of displaying those behaviours, individuals will start to be more anxious. They will start to doubt themselves. You see that kind of self-confidence being hit. But from a team's point of view, teams start to go quiet. So but they maybe get more political amongst themselves, and they're not challenging the leadership. They're now resigning themselves to the fact that, well, this is our lot. This is how it is. And then from an organisational point of view, you start to see higher turnover. There are complaints coming through, but it's whether those complaints get looked at.
It's losing that diversity of thought and opinion, isn't it? Because people are too afraid to express their views.
No, you often find people who, they've got mortgages, they've got kids, whatever, and if their boss is like that, how would you coach someone who was in that position and who had to perhaps build their own resilience to protect themselves against?
So from the employee's point of view.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is, I would say, if you were genuinely talking with somebody with psychopathic or displaying psychopathic behaviours in the workplace, I would say don't confront them. So don't try and change them. I think that's important. It goes back to the question about, can you change somebody? I would say don't try and change them. So it's not about pointing out the error of their ways, because I think that will almost definitely backfire because they won't see that. I would say it's important to document facts, not feelings. I think this is where a lot of people maybe struggle, because they come forward with how it's made them feel. And it's difficult from an organisational point of view to deal with that. So deal with facts. there is something called the Golden Gate approach, which I've heard about recently, and it's actually I think it's developed from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, I believe. So this is about allowing your enemy to retreat with grace. So instead of trying to make a corporate psychopath back down, you kind of give them an opportunity to back out of something. Doesn't mean it will always work, but it might be an option. So it might be, well, you've asked me to do something, and I'm feeling really uncomfortable about it, but I'm guessing your intent wasn't to make me feel uncomfortable or nervous, and I just wanted to raise it with you. So in a way, how do you give them an opportunity to kind of back out gracefully? You need to be careful with that, because I think that might just make them back off short term. Ultimately, not ultimately, I guess you should also look at where's the support in the organisation. So peers and colleagues, talk to HR, but again, information should be about facts, not just feelings. And ultimately, you might have to do the brave thing and leave. And I've been in that position myself, thought, well, how do you battle against what on reflection, I think would be somebody with some very dark kind of behaviours and traits? Well, I leave. So a job that I had where a consultant was brought in, and that consultant was that business consultant was really brought in to try and reduce costs, and he was going around systematically meeting all the senior leaders, and there was a fear spreading about what's this guy to do, what's he like, and when I met him, he just charmed me. He basically made me feel like I was one of the most important assets in the organisation, when actually I was being manipulated. And it took me a few months to kind of realise. And when I did, then you sometimes you feel like the walls are closing in. So I thought, what can I do? And I made the decision to leave and go and do something else.
I suppose getting to that point can be quite a difficult place to get to, and having coached people in those positions as well. There's something about, okay, what can you do to take control? You're getting to the point where you think, I need to leave this organisation. It's either them or me, or I can't tolerate this anymore. So there's things like sprucing up your CV, starting to network out with, getting in touch with contacts, just to get a sense of this isn't completely hopeless, I guess. There are things you can do. But I think when you're mentally in that space, because I've been in that space before as well, your executive function and can start to shut down. You kind of, the things that you were capable of doing before can start to feel really difficult, but just kind of doing some positive steps towards, okay, if I need, what would job hunting look like, and start, investigating that. So I think as hard as it might be to leave an organisation that you might have once loved, at the end of the day, you've got to look after your own well-being.
Yeah, I think some of the if I could give myself some advice looking back when I was in a particular situation, I would say think about your own mental health and your own reputation. So how do you... So taking control is a really good point, because I think that if you can take control of that situation by leaving, that could be the best outcome. It was in my case, and I think if I could do it differently, I would think more about leaving as positively as possible, which might sound like that you're giving ground to the very personal people that have made your life a misery. But at the end of the day, I think it's about taking that higher moral stance and saying, no, I'm above this. I'm going to look after my mental health. I'm going to look after my reputation. I'm not going to burn my bridges, because then who knows what the future holds. I'm going to leave as positively as possible, and I'm going to, onwards and upwards. And I think that when we can start to view these things as an opportunity, and it can be really difficult at the time, but I do look back now and think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Maybe not quite the way it happened, but I could have behaved slightly differently, and then, I'll learn from that.
So how do you spot a corporate psychopath? Is there a killer question you could ask the person?
There's probably a few questions, but I think a good question to ask at interview might be around something like, talk to me about a time when you had to get rid of somebody from your team or your organization. And it's the response that you want to kind of like really focus on. So are they reflective about it? Are they thinking about the challenges and how difficult it was? And maybe personally it was difficult for them. Or do they start to depersonalize it and brag about how they did it, almost as an achievement, rather than something that most people would find difficult to do? And that might be a good red flag, particularly at an interview.
So then you start getting your CV together. Okay.
So for everyone who's listening, who's now wondering if they've worked or have worked or will work for a corporate psychopath, what advice would you give them?
I guess from an individual point of view, look for patterns. Don't normalize toxicity, so don't make excuses for it. But I think overriding all of that, I would say trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So we'll have to leave it there. Thanks again, business psychologist Andy Whitehead. We'll put some links in the podcast notes to some of the resources we've talked about, including some of your YouTube videos.
Yeah, they're great. I highly recommend them. And thanks to you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed hearing about corporate psychopathy and how to avoid it, of course. There are lots of great guests to hear from in our previous episodes of Culture Reset, so do check them out. And please like and follow us so you don't miss future episodes with wonderful guests like Andy. But for now, till next time, it's goodbye from me, Caroline Kenyon.
And from me, Juliet Kumar.
And from our guest.
And from me, Andy Whitehead.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.